Undeclared wars are commonplace. Tragically, our government engages in preemptive war, otherwise known as aggression, with no complaints from the American people. Sadly, we have become accustomed to living with the illegitimate use of force by government. To develop a truly free society, the issue of initiating force must be understood and rejected.
What if sometimes, to love your country, you had to alter or abolish the government? What if Jefferson was right? What if that government is best which governs least? What if it is dangerous to be right when the government is wrong? What if it is better to perish fighting for freedom than to live as a slave? What if freedom's greatest hour of danger is now?
Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Tuesday, February 24th, 2026. Matt Ho joins us now. Matt, always a pleasure, my dear friend. Thank you for accommodating my schedule. Before we get into the American complicity in Israel's expansion, what is the significance, in your view, of Ukraine's use of a British missile and American intelligence to attack and severely damage a Russian munitions plant 800 miles into Russia?
Well, thanks for having me on, Judge. Yeah, I mean, this is the way the war will continue to go unless it's brought to an end through a negotiated political settlement. And the powers outside of the war, specifically the Western powers that have provoked this war, sustained this war, enabled this war, they'll continue to be reined into it. And the Ukrainians, of course, of course, they're going to use whatever help they can receive, will continue to do so. So these types of long-range strikes that may or may not have any real impact on one of the other nations' ability to actually wage the war will continue, and they'll increase because the perceived PR value, public relations value of these types of strikes are what's important. So particularly for the Ukrainians, demonstrating to their European backers, demonstrating to those in the US who still back them that we're still in this fight, we can win this, keep sending us money and weapons.
Wow. And if the Kremlin retaliates, I mean, Larry Johnson is of the view that the Kremlin is considering retaliating on the munitions factory that makes the missiles, one of which was sent to destroy this Russian munitions factory. And this British factory is in a suburb of London.
I think we're still far away from that, Judge, but it's not something that you just dismiss outright, though. The possibility of us getting to that point where the Russians launch a missile to destroy a factory in Britain, that's foreseeable. That's certainly, if you go back, because today is the 4th year anniversary of the start of this war. This is when the Russian troops came across the border, and this is the 4-year anniversary of this. So we're now officially in the 5th year of this war. And something like that, if you brought it up 4 years ago, you'd be mocked, you'd be derided. And in some circles, you still would be. I mean, there certainly are those out there who, look, what you've been saying, what the folks on your platform have been saying, I think what many of the people who watch and listen have been saying has proven correct about this war. This is a war that Ukraine cannot win and Russia cannot lose. So the idea of the war expanding, whether it be horizontally with increased more advanced weaponry, more dangerous weaponry, or I'm sorry, that's vertically, horizontally, where it expands across the borders. Yeah, absolutely, Judge. Why is that something that's shouldn't be taken into account? And the commentary from the Russians suggested. I think you'll see other things much before that, such as, say, maybe Russians seizing European ships. That might be something you see, but this idea that, this could be getting into the early days of World War III if we don't find a negotiated political settlement. Yeah, I mean, I think you're a fool if you don't believe that's a possibility.
Before we jump to Iran, Does the Kremlin have the ability to end the war in a week?
I don't know, Judge. I don't know about that. I don't. I think they could certainly persecute the war on with a heavier tone to it, with a more destructive point to it. They could flatten, say, all the government buildings, start flattening all the civilian infrastructure, and start really going after the key logistics and lines of communications in Ukraine's rear, particularly those areas where NATO pushes equipment into Ukraine to make the war a lot harder for both the Ukrainian military and government, as well as for the Ukrainian people. But to end the war, no, I don't think that's possible. I mean, that would require the capitulation of Kyiv, and that would require the conquest of not just central Ukraine, but also Western Ukraine. So I don't think that's something that's doable. But certainly the idea that the Russians could make this war a lot worse in a week's time, absolutely.
All right. Switching gears, in your view, is the U.S. war on Iran inevitable?
I'd like to think not, Judge. And the only person who knows the answer to this is Donald Trump. I mean, I think that's something we can be pretty assured of. The problem is we can't be assured of what Donald Trump's thinking. God knows if he knows what he's thinking, right? And I wish that was
be assured of his thinking from 1 minute to the next,
right? And I wish we were just being glib, right, Judge? I wish we were just like throwing it out there to insult the man, like trying to do a bit of back and forth, some type of humor at his expense, but we're not. I mean, this is the reality of watching the American empire move through the world, is that you have an emperor, Donald Trump, who is prone to fits, spasms. He's mercurial, he's temperamental. And as you just said, he doesn't know what he wants to do from one moment to the next. So every day it's, this is as Ray McGovern would say, we're trying to understand the Kremlin here. We're trying to practice criminology, as they used to call it, by trying to read in between the lines. Or there are leaks from various camps in Washington, D.C. or Tel Aviv, trying to make us think that it's going to go one way or the other. Of course, the last day or two, this has been about the story that General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, is saying that the war would come with a lot of cost, something that we've talked about. But then the counter to that, where Trump himself says General Kane has said that the war would be won easily. And then, of course, the counter to Trump's counter so we're just witnessing this politicking in this, again, public relations activity going on. And the reality is the only person who will know the answer to that is Donald Trump. But certainly the forces are there, Judge. The amount of manpower, the amount of equipment, material, the amount of logistics efforts that's put into this, the posturing, as well as, and I think this is the most important thing for me, the inertia of history, right? We have 45 plus years of the United States hostility to Iran, of one administration after another conducting some form of warfare against the Iranian state, against the Iranian people. And now, is this the time for that to culminate? And there's been some argument presented that Donald Trump is obsessed with this idea of being the president who could do what no other president could do. Reagan couldn't do it. Bush couldn't do it. Clinton couldn't do it, etc. He'll be the president that ends the Islamic State of Iran.
The headline in the Washington Post was substantial. The copy was substantial. This is a major leak by someone, either in the Pentagon or the CIA, that does not want the war.
I think, Judge, it was across the Post, Axios, and maybe the Journal or Financial Times, but there were three major media outlets that published this concern of the Pentagon.
Top general sees risk in attack on Iran. General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, expressed his concerns at a White House meeting last week with Trump and his top aides. These people, in my air quotes, not in the paper, cautioning that any major operation against Iran will face challenges because U.S. munitions stockpile has been significantly depleted by Washington's ongoing defense of Israel and support of Ukraine. Kane's remarks at the White House have not been previously reported. Before you respond, Chris, can you put up President Trump's posting? He posted this this morning, almost while the ink was still wet on the Washington Post. The story does not attribute this vast wealth of knowledge to anyone and is 100% incorrect. General Kane, like all of us, would like not to see war, but if a decision is made on going against Iran at a military level, it is his opinion that it will be something easily won. Matt, that can't be his opinion. Nobody says it will be easily won. No serious military person, no matter what their political ideology is or loyalty to the president may be.
Two things, Judge. The first is that when you continue that quote from Trump, he talks about the false reports of non-attacks or the false reports of limited attacks, which might be, now here I am practicing criminology, right? But that might be.
That's because you learned from Ray.
I know. I was just actually texting with Ray earlier, and learning from him, like you said, I'm blessed and I'm grateful in that way. This idea that maybe in this message that Trump put out this morning, there was a tell there by Trump saying that the stories about no attack or a limited attack are false. And that what we will see is a sustained campaign to try and achieve regime change. Like that is the objective. That isn't just punitive. This is not to make a statement, right? This is not to get the Iranians back in line or just get the Israelis off their back for another 6 months.
So what do you think he's going to tell the American people? His goal is regime change, which he definitely can't justify, or his goal is destruction of nuclear enrichment, which he claims he obliterated back in June.
Right. The comedian Jon Stewart says he should the phrase is rebliterated in terms of redoing an obliteration. But I think what he's going to say, Judge, is he's going to keep it close to his chest. I think he's going to do the type of remarks where he lays out how evil the Iranian regime is, how successful the United States under his command has been in putting the Iranians back in check, how no other American president's been willing to stand up to the Iranians, and he'll leave it as an open-ended question. He might say something about the ballistic missiles. He might say something about Iran's support for Hezbollah, for Hamas, for other actors in the region. But I think he's going to kind of dance over that and leave himself a lot of room. That's I think how he'll play it tonight on the State of the Union.
Wow. Drop Site News says the CIA's verified X/Twitter account published today a Persian language message urging Iranians to contact the agency securely, saying it can hear your voice. The outreach, framed as support, effectively solicits intel and sources from inside Iran in the open, and the post comes amid escalating U.S. pressure on Tehran and threats of war. Talk about the pressure on Trump. It's all coming from the Zionists, from the donor class, isn't it? I guess, and it's also coming from the Republican neocons.
Yeah, and all the usual vampires and ghouls in the foreign policy establishment, Judge. So the military-industrial complex that will see this as a restocking opportunity, as they'll call it, right? The chance to sell more missiles, maybe even a destroyer will get sunk, and the United States will have to pay a few $1 billion for a newest destroyer. I mean, there are other parts of the American empire, its establishment, the fossil fuel industry, of course, the oil and gas wealth of Iran. I mean, this is what you can make the argument that this is what it's essentially about and has been for 4.5 decades. Then there are also, too, those who see an Iran of 95 million people and the market that's there. So there's just this commercial interest. So you have, as well as what I said earlier, the long history, the long narrative of how Iran is the prime adversary of the United States. And you'll see Democratic members of Congress making that point over and over again. This is what they'll do, what they are doing now. You see many Democrats in Congress saying we should have a war powers resolution, but the Iranian regime is evil. It's a threat to the region. It is an adversary of the U.S. So there are a lot of people in Washington, D.C. who've wanted this war. It is a war that has long been wanted, essentially. And so I think the number of voices that Trump can turn to that give him pause or say this is a bad idea, let alone try and entirely reevaluate his frame of mind or try and orientate him to some type of different understanding, a more realistic, complex, historical understanding, just simply aren't there. I mean, from what we're led to believe, that he's trusting most in Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Now, that might be a good thing because they don't belong, they're not nominally from the foreign policy establishment. So they don't come with that credential of neoconservative.
Yeah, but there are Zionists.
They are Zionists, absolutely. But they don't come from that foreign policy elite. They don't come from the class that inhabits Washington, D.C., who were all vetted by the military-industrial complex, who all believe in a historical understanding of the United States that is mythological. You know, they've all gone to Harvard and Yale and Stanford and Georgetown, right? So at least with Witkoff and Kushner, they are outsiders in that perspective. Now, they certainly are looking at it in the perspective of what's best for us. Kushner, absolutely what's best for Israel. So there's only so much grace I can give them. But, you know, at least you don't have the same type of advisors that, say, a George W. Bush had when it came to invading Iraq, or a Barack Obama had when it came to sending 100,000 troops to Afghanistan in 2009.
Here's a montage of President Trump and his real estate buddy. Chris, cut number 1.
Last summer, I ordered devastating strikes on Iran's key nuclear facilities and achieving total obliteration of the Iran nuclear potential capability, totally obliterated.
They've been enriching well beyond the number that you need for civil nuclear. It's up to 60%. They're probably a week away from having industrial grade bomb making material.
We assess that the American strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities has set back Iran's ability to develop nuclear weapons for many years to come. The nuclear threat of Iran, that was totally obliterated. Iran, where we wiped out their nuclear capacity for weapons. They totally obliterated the potential nuclear supply of Iran. In June, we obliterated Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity.
They're probably a week away from having industrial grade bomb making material.
So who do you believe? What do they believe?
This is a really important point to be making, that the people at the top, they don't know anything. You know, Judge, I'm sure you've seen at least clips of Tucker Carlson's interview with Mike Huckabee.
And we're going to show you at least one of those in a few minutes, as repellent as they are.
It's jaw dropping, you know, and the same as the one he had with Senator Ted Cruz. Or just, I mean, I can tell you from my own experience, lobbying in Congress against, say, the Afghan war, against the Syrian war or the Libyan war, just the paucity, the vapidness, the shallowness of not just the members of Congress, but of the staffs. Mm-hmm. In 2011, I was in with the director of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, so the top staff person for John Kerry on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He had no idea how many troops the United States had in Afghanistan, right? Just one example of 1,000 we can provide here.
Right,
you know, well, this is the reality that these people don't know anything.
This will bring back memories for you of Ari Fleischer in the White House press room. Chris?
People want to be free. And given the chance to throw off a brutal dictator like Saddam Hussein, people will rejoice.
And may I ask if the administration expects the Allied forces to find evidence or remnants of chemical or biological weapons or a reconstituted nuclear program?
Well, there is no question that we have evidence and information that Iraq has weapons of mass destruction, biological and chemical particularly. This was the reason that the president felt so strongly that we needed to take military action to disarm Saddam Hussein, since he would not do it himself. As the military effort continues, I think you will see information develop for yourself firsthand. This is one of the reasons that there are so many reporters present with the military. In many ways, you will have these answers yourselves. You are there. You are on the ground. And you will find the answers, and they will speak volumes themselves.
So you expect the weapons will be found?
There's no question we have said that Saddam Hussein possesses biological and chemical weapons, and all this will be made clear in the course of the operation for whatever duration it takes.
But we all know the outcome there.
Mhm.
That's an example of the nonsense that comes from the government. Here's an example of the danger of what government officials believe and say. Chris, cut number 2.
Christian Zionism. I want to go back because that's where we started.
I'm not going to let you off on this because you have said it 3 times that God gave this land to this people. And so it is entirely fair for me, with respect, to ask, what land are you talking about? Because I just read Genesis 15, as I have many times. And that land, I think it says, from the Nile to the Euphrates, which is, once again, basically the entire Middle East. So God gave that land to his people, the Jews, or he didn't. You're saying he did. What does that mean? Does Israel have the right to that land? Because you're appealing to Genesis. You're saying that's the original deed.
It would be fine if they took it all.
Now, you're aware of the firestorm that phrase has caused in the Middle East. It would be fine if they took it all. Well, he's not qualified to be the United States ambassador to any country with an attitude and with words like that.
Well, to be the ambassador of the United States to Israel, Judge, I think the paramount or the primary purpose is to represent the interests of Israel and not represent the interests of the United States. And I think Huckabee, certainly achieves that. But he's now an outlier. You go back to Trump's first ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, who oversaw the move of the embassy from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv, who oversaw the slaughter, the shootings of thousands of Palestinians who were peaceably and nonviolently, taking part in the Great March of Return. You have Jack Lew, Joe Biden's ambassador, who did everything he can to enable Israel's genocide in the time he was in that position. So I think that is the prerequisite to be ambassador to Israel for the United States, is to keep in mind that your role is to promote the interests of Israel and not promote the interests of the United States. I mean, I should note that Dan Shapiro, who was Barack Obama's ambassador to Israel, had a very testy relationship, but that was with Netanyahu. So anyone who's got an ounce of respectability will have a testy relationship with Netanyahu. But I think what you saw with Huckabee is essentially that's the job description for American ambassador to Israel.
Do you think it's a coincidence that Netanyahu personally and all of his acolytes in the moneyed class here in the U.S. and all of his buddies in the Congress are pressing Trump to invade Iran at the same time that the violence in the West Bank is accelerating? Is this all part of a scheme to expand into the West Bank while the world is looking at Iran?
It's not a coincidence at all, Judge. This is what's necessary for the Iranians to begin the final efforts to annex the West Bank. The West Bank has always been the Israelis' priority since 1948. It's been that way since 67, of course. But the idea that these other actions by the Israelis throughout the region, whether it be Gaza or the Golan Heights, whether it be Lebanon or Syria or Iraq or Yemen or now Iran, those are all shaping efforts or supporting efforts to create the conditions to isolate the West Bank from any support, whether that support be political, diplomatic, military, financial, economic, moral. The idea is that if your primary objective, your main goal is the West Bank, then clear out all hindrances, clear out all obstacles, take care of anything that can get in the way from you focusing on your objective. And so the idea being is that even, and God help me for saying this, Judge, right? But the idea that the genocide in Gaza essentially a supporting effort for the Israelis in terms of creating the conditions to successfully annex the West Bank. You'll see the same with, say, Lebanon. We need to make sure we've neutralized Hezbollah. We need to control the airspace, control the ground as best as possible in southern Lebanon so that no pressure can be put on us from Lebanon, that northern Israel won't be attacked while we carry out this annexation. Because this annexation, which the beginnings of are well been underway. And now in the last week, we've seen some really important steps by the Israelis, essentially declaring that they are going to just start seizing land, through very euphemistic or semantic actions or phrases to defend themselves. But essentially, they're just going to start taking Palestinian land. The response is going to dwarf what the Israelis went through in the first and second intifadas. And I think the Israelis understand that. And so they have to be prepared to have their focus solely on the West Bank and limited elsewhere. And as part of this, you would essentially have Iran as, with the exception of the Houthis, the last standing member of the axis of resistance. That last standing member, that last finger or pillar of the axis of resistance needs to be taken care of. And so you bring the Americans in to do your work for you. Right. I mean, and this idea then that the American war on Iran, if it comes, it can be viewed as many reasons for that war. I'm not saying this is the primary or only reason for war with Iran, but it certainly is one. If you brought in all the folks, Judge, who are responsible for bringing this war to this point, the Israelis would be sitting in the front row, of course, but there'd be other people in there, too. But, this idea that the Americans essentially will be conducting a war against Iran as a supporting effort to isolate the West Bank, as well as to distract the world from what the Israelis are doing. Because as the United States is dropping missiles and dropping bombs and firing missiles and killing scores and scores of Iranians, the world will be focused on that and not noticing what the Israelis are doing in the West Bank.
So assuming that Trump and the people around him, the National Security Council and the Secretary of State all know or have a grasp of what you just said, is the United States as criminally culpable in the murder and theft in the West Bank as it has been in Gaza?
Yes, and it has been, Judge. It has been. The United States has provided the political, the diplomatic, the economic support to the Israelis to carry out their settlement of the West Bank. Those 750,000 settlers in the West Bank would not be there without the United States political and diplomatic protection. They would not be there without American economic assistance. Certainly, they wouldn't be there without U.S. military assistance. When I was in the West Bank with Ray McGovern, of all people, in 2017, we were in Hebron. And this settler didn't like what we were doing. We were standing there with these Palestinians, and he came driving up in this fancy dune buggy type thing. And the first thing he said to me when he got out was that, I got this car, I got this dune buggy from your president. That's how much they support us. I don't know what you're doing here.
Wow. They let Ray McGovern there?
Yeah.
I love Ray, as you know. Matt, thank you very much.
Judge, if you could see behind me, that photo there, that's from Hebron. I don't think people can see it. Maybe the screen isn't wide enough. There you go. That photo there is from Hebron, and we were taking part. We were there with Veterans for Peace, and we were taking part in a demonstration. And the Israelis started firing tear gas at us. And if you could see it, you could see that there is a fellow turned around, walking away, holding his arm, and that's Ray. He had got shot in the arm by a tear gas canister. Luckily, only in the arm. If it hit him in the chest or in the face, might have killed him. But that's the type of guy he was. He walked it off, shook it off, and Ray was probably 80, 76, 77 years old at that time. And that's the kind of guy Ray McGovern is. He's in Hebron, standing up for justice and the rights of people.
Tough as nails and of profound intellectual honesty. Matt, thank you, and a blessing to all of us, from whom I've learned as well. Matt, thank you very much for this. A great conversation, my dear man. Look forward to seeing you next week.
All right. Thanks, Judge.
Sure. And coming up, if you're watching us live in 30 minutes at 3 o'clock this afternoon on all of this, does the government recognize any restraints on itself? Does the government follow its own laws? Colonel Karen Kwiatkowski, Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.